What's up, everybody? It's Dan, Binder Boneyard, coming at you from the office at the shop. It is a fall Saturday. Normally I do this on Sundays, but got a Sunday haul. Going to go bring back the Travelette that I'm going to build for the Nora 1000 Baja race. This truck will be the chase truck for the Anything Scout race effort, which is the race Terra that they raced this year, the 4-cylinder Terra. And then they're also hopefully going to have the restoration on Sherman Balch's Scout done, and that will also be raced as an exhibition, I think. But having two race trucks means the chase crew has to be extra prepared. So I'm going to bring this Travelette with the service bed and really try to outfit it for multiple or as functional as possible. That's the plan. We'll see if I can pull it off in time, but I've got a lot of the parts here. A lot of the stuff is ready to go. The service bed needs some repair because just use and whatnot. It needs to be set up a little differently for race duty. So I've got a rack that I had built a long time ago that will outfit to put on there because it is a short bed. The chase trucks, you need every square footage of bed you can for spares and tools and tires and fuel cans and gear and everything else that you want to be prepared for, because in Mexico, and if you're running a Scout, if you have a problem, you're on your own. And so that's the important thing there. So outfitting this chase truck is going to be the plan. But anyways, I don't want to get too far off on that. We'll do a different podcast about chase truck and desert racing another time. But thank you, everybody, for listening. I appreciate it. And this episode, we're going to talk about metal work, metal fabrication, that sort of thing. And I know I've done one or two of these in the past, but I think they were quite a while ago. So we're going to touch on metal fab again, just for the guys that want to delve into that side of owning their international, because you can't own one of these things and not have to do some sort of metal repair, whether it be rust repair on the body, frame, suspension work, or even you go farther and do custom bumpers and roll cages and things like that. So I'm going to try and cover some stuff here. So thank you, everybody, for following along. Thank you for listening. I appreciate it. I love you all. Very grateful, very thankful for your Patreon donations and the subscriptions on the Instagram and that sort of stuff. I really do appreciate it. So we'll start off with basics, welders, equipment. You're gonna need a welder. If you're just gonna do sheet metal work, 110 welder is fine. I try to avoid the Harbor Freights and the low dollar stuff. At least go to your local welding store or try to find one on Marketplace or something that you can run. I prefer gas shielded. Flux core wire and sheet metal don't really go well together. It's just not, it doesn't work well. Flux core is fine for framework, plates, things like that, because its flux core is similar to stick welding. So it's you get slag and it's dirty and you can't lay the nicest of bead, but it's strong and it holds. But sheet metal work, you need small welds, good heat control, and so then you run the gas. So little Lincoln, Miller, Hobart, those guys. Even I'm not a super fan of ESOBs. I worked in some big shops back in the day because my background is fabrication. In the early 2000s, we had some ESOBs. I think the shop manager fell for the ESOB sales guy. We kicked all the old Lincolns to the side, and they set up all these ESOBs and feeders and all this stuff, and they didn't work very well. They were really problematic, and a lot of the guys, the old welders, they stopped using the ESOBs and drug the old CP300s or CP301, I think they were, the old Lincolns out, because they were the power units. And then we called them dogs, and so you had these feeder, the spools of wire were on small carts, and you had these long leads. And anyway, man, I'm all over the place today. But anywho, Lincoln, Miller, Hobart, that's kind of the top three in my opinion. I am a Miller man, although we do have a Lincoln 110 welder here that we do solely sheet metal work with. So you can buy Lincolns at Home Depot. I recommend going to the welding supply store and getting something there. But you want to be able to run hard wire, like 023 is small wire that's good for sheet metal work. And a lot of it, with everything in life, the quality of your work comes down to prep. So everything needs to be clean. You got to have a good fit up. You need to be using good material. It's tough with automotive stuff because most of automotive sheet metal is 19 gauge, which is a weird gauge. Like, it's just not, you can't just go to your steel supply store and buy 19 gauge unless you live in a big city. I like my friend over at Tin Man's, talk to them, and they get truckloads of 19 gauge because they're in Chicago. So out here in Central Oregon, I said 19 gauge to my steel guy, and he was like, really? Like, you really want 19 gauge? So we do everything out of 18 gauge cold rolled, which is a raw, pickled and oiled, no mill scale. I recommend you look into something like that. For you, if you're doing a large sheet metal project, you're going to want P&O in the 18 gauge. So anyway, prep is super important. And then, practice your setups and stuff on some scrap or some drop, or shear off a few small pieces and figure out your machine settings so that when you go to actually start welding on your body, that you're set up right. Number one thing to think about with sheet metal work, especially exterior sheet metal work, is heat. You do not want to heat up those panels because they will move and warp and suck down or pop out. So, you do a spot and then you move and do another spot, several inches away from where you were, and then do another spot to keep the heat down. And I've seen, I don't watch a lot of the car shows, but I've seen these guys doing metal work, and they use wet rags to cool down the area that they're working on. The last thing I want to do is introduce more potential rust to the process. So we do not use wet rags here. I really, really try to keep deter guys from using wet rags. What works just as good, in my opinion, is air. So keep an air hose near you. Make sure your air compressor is up to the task. But every time you make a tack, then you hit it with compressed air for 4 or 5 Mississippis, and then you move on. Make another tack, cool it down. Make another tack, cool it down. And yeah, it's a time-consuming, tedious process, but doing it that way will ensure that the heat won't spread to other parts of your panel, that the warping will be minimal, any panel changing will be minimal, and so that's what I recommend for external sheet metal work. Small welder, small wire, keep it cool, move around, don't weld in the same spot twice, and then go that route. Grinding is the same way. You can introduce just as much, if not more, heat to the area with a grinder. So you want to small areas, knock it down quick, cool it down fast with air, make sure the whole panel is staying cool, move around, and then it's not until you've knocked down all your welds to a reasonable height that then you can go over it with sanding block or a file. Some guys will use a file depending on the shape of the panel, whatever, and then finish it out with the DA, 80 grit, then 120 or 180, and go that route. You can use some guide coat. Figure, if you can't see what it's doing, sometimes you can get away with using primer as a guide coat, and then you sand it and see where the high and low spots are, and then you can go back from there. But yeah, external sheet metal work like that, there's finesse. It takes a while. If you're patching a rusty spot, you want to cut out about a half inch more area than you think you need, because I just know how the rust is on internationals, and it's always bigger than what you can see. So, and then the other thing I recommend is when you've got a hole cut for your patch, to try and get in there and vacuum out or blow out any loose rust, and then try and treat it with something acid. We use a lot of phosphoric acid to neutralize that rust. It turns it black, makes it hard, and then you can throw paint or primer over the top of it, and that'll help slow down any future rust. It doesn't, I don't think anything stops rust completely forever, but doing that at least keeps it from growing for quite a while. So you always try and treat that stuff. Even like Pour 15, which I'm not a fan of, but I know a lot of guys use it. Pour 15, you throw right on top of the rust. You don't do any treating, and that's supposed to stop it as well. But anyway, if you're going to move on to something more heavy duty structural type stuff, you're going to want a welder with a little more power than a 110. You can get away with some repairs up to maybe 3/16 inch thick material with a 110 welder, but you got to have a dedicated 20 amp power source for that 110 so it can have the best chance of penetration. I don't like to go much more than that on a 110. So yeah, you really want a 220 powered machine that can put out some power. We run 030 wire in our big welder because we do sheet metal work with it still. So 030 is a little bit heavy for that, but it still works pretty decent. I've done a lot of body repair with that unit. Mine's an old Miller-Matic 250. Doesn't even have a dial. It's got a big, you change the lead from high to low, and then it's got this big clunky thing that's like 1 through 6 that sets the voltage. So each, on high, and you crank it to 6, you can do some serious burning with that. So it spends a lot of its time on low, but like number 5. That's where it does a lot of work, or high and number 1. Just because we operate in the middle there, and that's how I do all of my equipment. Everything I buy, I don't buy anything that I'm always operating at the upper end of its duty range. You always want to be mid-range. We have a Bridgeport mill here that's capable of a lot, and we use it for all of our door hinge rebuilds and some basic milling. But it sure is nice knowing that we could do high-end precision work if we needed to. So anyway, you're going to want to find a 220 welder. Again, Miller, Lincoln, Hobart. Marketplace is a good place to look for those, because they can get expensive. If you're just a hobbyist, it's tough to justify spending $2,500 on a brand new Miller-Matic 250 from the welding supply store. But if you're doing roll cages, spring hanger, suspension work, bumpers, sliders, you really want a good welder. And I know I hear it all the time, like, oh, I built whatever with my Lincoln 110, or I don't recommend 110 welders for stuff that you're going to depend on. A lot of guys use arc welding still. You stick weld a lot of that. Stick weld, I try not to recommend anything under 3/16. You don't want to stick weld because it's just too hot. And really, I don't think 1/4 inch is really necessary on any automotive application except maybe parts of the bumper. But for the most part, 3/16 is more than enough for a lot of stuff. If it's a weight carrying area, like a pivot area on a swing out carrier, you can double plate with the 3/16 or something like that. But yeah, when you go straight to 1/4, I just think it's excessive and overly necessary. I don't know, but unless it's actual mounts, like if it's a spring hanger or a link mount or shock mount or something like that, then yes, you want to be at least 1/4 for those. 1/4 and double shear if it's for shock mounts and whatnot. So some of that is application based, but I guess my thought about the material thickness was, on some of the accessory stuff like bumpers and cages and whatnot, you don't need, all of our roll cages are 120 wall, which is 1/8 inch. 1 3/4. 120 wall is more than adequate for most of the roll cages, roll bars out there. All the foot plates are 1/4 inch. So that's something to keep in mind. But yeah, really 1/4 inch wall on a bumper is excessive in my opinion. Because if you're hitting something like, I don't know, like you're going to cause other problems. If your 1/4 inch bumper doesn't bend, it's going to wrinkle your frame or move stuff around, and that's what you don't want either. But again, comes down to with that kind of welder is prep. Again, get the rust off, get it clean, get the mill scale off, because the heavier materials come with that black mill scale, so you're going to want to have that hard stone and get that off of there so that it's good clean metal to metal. Again, you're going to want to practice on some material before you get into it, just to make sure your settings are right on your machine, and get that good. Wire feed is pretty straightforward, so everyone has their own opinion on patterns or how you run, or I'm kind of a circular forward and back kind of guy. Some other guys are weave, zigzag guys, and then there's other guys that just straight no motion, just push or pull depending on how they feel. I know there's you can get into the weeds on the AWS specifications and how to pass your testing and stuff like that, but for most of us that's not really necessary. And if you're trying to get that precise, then you're not your average home hobbyist. But when you're doing important stuff like bumper mounts, make sure what you're mounting to is good. Like, don't just bolt your 200-pound bumper to the 2 bolts on the front of the frame, because that's gonna tear through the holes in the bumper or tear through the holes in the frame. So when you're building stuff, make sure you're accounting for extra plating to go down the frame rail to carry the weight. If you're going to have a winch on your front bumper, not only does the bumper need to be up to the task of double what the winch is capable of, but also the frame mounting needs to be appropriately matched. So that's important. Same with the back bumper. if you're going to be towing something and you don't have a receiver hitch, which I recommend everyone get the bolt-on receiver hitch. It's just better that way than trying to build a bumper with a ball on it, because you end up being too tall anyways. You need the receiver hitch as a drop, because trailer manufacturers design their trailers with a 19-inch tongue height. At least that's how it used to be. It may have changed, but for a million years, trailer manufacturers were set at 19 inches. And so that's the beauty of the square receiver tube, was that you could fine tune your hitch height with your drop hitch or raised hitch, depending on what you have. So on the trucks and travelalls, the drop hitch is nice. I mean, I have them on everything I tow with, and it's a must have. I would never bumper pull anything, just because of, I don't know, just the height problems, and then being sure that the bumper is strong enough to handle whatever you're trying to do. Not only just for going down the road, but if you get rear-ended or something happens, the last thing you want is your bumper taking that impact. You want the drop hitch, the receiver to take that, because that's easily replaceable. Whereas if you mangle a bumper and it hits a tailgate or your end caps or something, then that causes other problems. So, and the receiver hitches are available through, your local trailer place. You just got to make sure you look for it. Sometimes you have to order it by dimension and not necessarily by application. And you'll find that the square body Chevy ones are very close to the International C and D series frames. You might have to add an extra hole to the frame to get a Chevy one to fit, but they do go on fairly easily. The Scout 2 one is pretty specific to Scout 2, and that is available through like U-Haul and places like that. But so when you're welding, like I said, just clean. Make sure you got good PPE. You got a decent hood with a good viewing lens that you can see out of. That's the hardest thing, one of the hardest parts about getting a good weld is seeing it, is being able to see what you're doing, where you're going. I slack sometimes and let my viewing window, the cover lens gets really beat up, tons of damage to it, and it starts to darken my viewing window. And so I'll be welding and then I'll stop and I'll flip the hood up, and then turns out I went a half inch past where I was supposed to stop, or just get a little bit out of where I needed to be because I just couldn't see it. And so then I go change my cover lens and make sure everything's clean, and then magically I can see again. So making sure you have a good hood. You don't have to have a fancy auto dark, digital elite, whatever, speed glass. You can get by with a good fixed shade flip down hood. If you're, and that takes some skill to get used to, but I love a gold lens fixed shade hood when I can get away with it. But if I'm welding, tacking out a roll cage or doing something in tight quarters, I can't flip my mask down to do it. So I do enjoy the auto dark. And then same with the TIG welding. When I'm TIGging, I need, I don't have the skills to flip a hood and still start where I need to start. So yeah, I don't know. I don't even know if I probably want to get into TIG welding in this. That's a upper skill level thing. Your most average Joes aren't going to need a TIG welder unless you feel like you want to do a bunch of aluminum or something like that. And you have to be careful because a lot of the cheaper TIGs on the market don't have an AC feature. They're only DC welders, which is steel and stuff like that. So make sure that if you are going to buy a TIG welder that it can handle AC. And AC, TIGging aluminum takes a ton of electricity. So Like I have a Synchrowave 250, and I've done some aluminum stuff where I've had that thing cranked to the max, and and it still takes a minute to heat up that aluminum and get everything to bond like it's supposed to, because aluminum just sucks the heat out. So if you're getting a TIG, make sure you really are sure that you want one and it's going to do what you need it to do. Again, TIG welding is the ultimate for body work as well, because you can keep the heat down to an absolute minimum, still get a good weld, and get her to work how it needs to work. But again, like TIG welding is a skill all on its own, running the foot pedal or finger wheel and adding filler and keeping from dabbing the tungsten and keeping from overheating. Like there's just a whole bunch of stuff that goes with TIG welding that I don't recommend the average novice home owner, home hobbyist get into, unless you really have money to burn and want to try and master another skill. It took me a long time to pick up TIG welding. Still not great at it. I do okay. Definitely good enough for customer work, but I'm you're not going to see my stuff pop up on weld porn anytime soon, or I'm not ever going to advertise myself as some expert welder. That's why Meticulous Metalworks does all of our aluminum tanks, because he welds miles of aluminum every day, and so he is an expert master craftsman at aluminum welding, and so that's why I'm happy to farm that out to him. But I do our own repairs in-house as far as like aluminum radiators. I'll buy a universal radiator and then change the neck location, or add a petcock, or add some other steam fitting or something. Like I do that myself with the Synchrowave. So I have to have that unit here, because that's the nice thing about being a full service shop, and that was always my goal. Was we have the mills, we have the lathes, we've got the TIG welders, the big welder, we've got all this stuff that we can do just about everything that needs to be done in a custom shop. We are not just a body shop, flip shop. We do everything, and that's what I've always wanted. And so that's why we're set up the way we're set up, because we can do the things that pop up that might slow you down on another build. We just handle in stride here because we have the equipment to do it. So that's something to think about in your own shop. If you want to be set up like that, then maybe consider a TIG welder, but use it regularly so that you know what the hell you're doing, because nothing's worse than blowing a hole in your aluminum radiator because you forgot how hard it was to weld thin aluminum to thick aluminum. So anyway, but yeah, that's kind of the gist, the high points of fabrication and welding stuff. Keep it clean, keep it good, keep the wind down out of your shop so you get good gas coverage. Try to make sure that you practice a few runs before you go to actually sticking the real material together. Make sure your machine is set up correctly, buy a decent unit, and practice often. Just like everything, it comes down to seat time to get good at anything. So yeah, hopefully you learned something. Hopefully that was informative. I'm sure I missed a lot of stuff because it's a pretty broad topic, but that's the high points. And I appreciate you guys. I love you very much. Until next time, I'm Dan from Binder Boneyard.